Hello, my name is Michael, and skip to the end of the video if you want to hear my absolutely off-the-wall, deranged theory that I thought of while I was watching this episode. But anyway, Season 2, Episode 5 of Severance was great, as every episode thus far of the show has been. We're back in the claustrophobic confines of the, well, I was going to say the Lumen building, but maybe we didn't actually leave the Lumen building in episode 4. But whatever your opinion on that, if they were actually outside or in some kind of Lumen holodeck, it doesn't really matter. We are back and dealing with the fallout of the ORTBO and the revelation that Helly R was actually Helena for the past few episodes, and just the general paranoia that has engendered. And, you know, maybe in some ways this could be considered calamitous, but maybe they can actually consider this a good thing, because they will permanently destroy, or they think they'll permanently destroy, any sense of unity between all of the MDR workers about what's happened. Irving, as we saw at the end of the last episode, is not back, and he has been fired. So is it possible maybe they'll rehire him or do something like that later on? Of course it's possible. I think they probably will at some point. When the MDR team starts working together again, they're going to want Irving back and demand that he come back. This episode was all about strained human relations, and it's just so fascinating to see, to closely look at the micro tells on a character's face when something is happening and think to yourself, what are they thinking? You know, that I can't tell much of the time exactly what's going through their head, because it's just so faint usually what we see, and we don't know how they're going to process that emotion that they're feeling at that time. The now 3-member team of MDR meets together. Helly R is back, and she's doing her Helly R strut walk, which is absolutely incredible. I loved seeing that. There's also a new sort of synthesized electronic score playing in the background of some scenes, which really seems to heighten the sci-fi nature of what's going on, makes it the world a little less mundane, walking through the halls with this eerie beep boop kind of. There's a real 70s vibe to everything that's going on here in Severance. And I don't know why they picked that one decade, but the corporate feel, it does feel like way back in the 1970s. And just some of the outfits people wear, the weird computers that they have, it all feels very retro, and I love it. There's even a sequence where they use one of those weird dot matrix printers from the 1990s that were really annoying and had the little edges that you had to tear off, and how obnoxious it was. And for some reason, Milchick was using it, which means that do even the non-severed employees have to use weird old technology when they're on the severed floor? I don't know. It seems a little peculiar, but initially all 3 of our MDR members are angry and scared and confronting Milchick, but they all kind of feel like 3 individuals confronting Milchick. They're not united in what they're doing.
Because you're a fucking Egan?
Was she spying on us?
Wait, what?
The whole time.
Dylan is enraged that his best friend is not coming back, and he kind of feels like he betrayed Irving in the last episode, but I don't know if I really, he's being too hard on himself, which if he's, emotionally and experientially fairly young, that's understandable. Although I still wonder why Dylan didn't run down the cliff with Mark and Mr. Milchick. Did anybody else think that was weird? Helly is rightfully not just angry, but I think for the first time we've seen her just absolutely terrified, disgusted, disturbed. She probably feels violated that her identity had been stolen by Helena, and how creeped out she is by that.
Helena Egan, in her executive capacity, was conducting valuable research.
By stealing my fucking body?
And I really wanted more of this from her perspective, but we kind of seem like we're looking at it kind of from a neutral perspective, or even from Mark's perspective, which is very paranoid about everything, because he refuses, even to the very end of the episode, to absolutely admit that this is Helly rather than Helena.
Mark, look, I'm not her. I'm not. I'm me. Helly.
And how do I know that?
What did everybody else think of this scene where we see Mark sort of blurry and faded on the left side of the screen? I initially didn't notice it because I was looking exclusively at Helly, but on second viewing it almost looks like Mark is being portrayed as half himself or not there, or like the Mark S. innie is slowly fading away or blurring the lines between him and Outie Mark in this sequence. I thought that was really cool looking. This moment with him and Helly also recontextualizes the first thing we ever hear in the show, which is Mark S. saying, "Who are you?" to Helly. Now he still is looking at Helly and saying, "Who are you?" But he means it very differently because he actually doesn't know who this person is. Maybe because he's angry at himself about the whole thing. You know, Helena confronts him and she has this wonderful expression on her face where she has feelings for Mark S. and she desperately wanted him.
You couldn't tell that she wasn't me?
Obviously not.
That he could tell that Helena wasn't her, and she's really kind of, it's really sweet and sad that she gets really kind of emotional about that. You can see it in her face with the wonderful, I've already talked about it, amazing face acting by Britt Lauer. It's great. And I felt so bad during that scene, bad for Helly, because she maybe she's thinking like, I guess Mark maybe doesn't really love me in that transcendent sense that he could instantly tell that it wasn't me, even though it looked just like me. She wanted that to happen, even though that's kind of unrealistic. But also I feel bad for Mark because he was used. He was also violated by Helena in her questionable, let's say, actions during the last episode. And he probably is feeling a lot of self-directed anger because he's ashamed that he wasn't able to tell that it was Helly. And maybe he feels like this has destroyed his affection, his love for her that was developing in the first season, that he doesn't really love her because, you know, he wasn't able to instantly, like, telepathically know that it wasn't actually the woman he loved. So it's just a sad, sad situation. This show, more than any since Twin Peaks, has got me just digging into all kinds of analysis and lore and overanalyzing absolutely everything that goes on ridiculously. Look, I spent like 45 minutes reading about the humoral theory of medicine because the four tempers are basically the four humors: black bile, bile, blood, and phlegm. And weirdly enough, they all correspond to a different season. So phlegm actually corresponds to winter because it's cold and wet. And I think that would somehow correspond to, and I think that likely corresponds to dread would be winter, and it's winter during the entire show so far. So this overpowering fear is being felt by everyone, I suppose. It's kind of difficult to get a grasp on Mark's behavior during this episode because it kind of felt when I first watched it like artificial writer's room conflict where they were sitting around going, we can't just have the characters all love each other like they did at the end of the first episode. So they kind of unnaturally put in conflict between all of them, which it seems like if they just came out and said everything that happened honestly, truthfully, all of their problems would finally be worked out, maybe. But, you know, it's hard to tell if Mark is suffering from reintegration sickness, and it's getting worse, as we see in this episode. But we don't know, that's the physical problems. We don't know the mental issues he's going through, and if he's bleeding into himself, and the reason he's acting this way around these two people is because he doesn't feel like Mark S. anymore. He feels like some new entity that's not Mark Scout or Mark S. He's sort of this new person with the blended memories of both of them. So with both of those experiences mixing together, it's hard to believe that he would have the exact same emotions necessarily, but he's just kind of unjustifiably being an asshole. But it just feels kind of unnatural that Mark has no interest at all in hearing what Helly experienced during the season finale and doesn't want to tell her about, well, I can see why he wouldn't want to tell her about it because he's suddenly shocked and scared that he would have to reveal this to Helly, even though he revealed it, to her immediately when he thought it was Helly in episode 1. So I don't know why he's suddenly backtracking on that, unless the weird sex thing in the last episode had something to do with it. But these interactions with Mark and Helly, I assume that they're going to change, but it just feels like they're unnaturally falling back into early season 1 patterns of behavior that are, carefully crafted by Lumen. This is being used by Lumen to divide the team when they used to be united. So, maybe it's intentional, but I just felt it was a little bit odd. Mark does seem obsessed with finishing the Cold Harbor file that's so important to Lumen. So maybe that's his outie kind of unknowingly exerting influence over Mark, and we'll find that out later, but the whole thing felt strange. We also get, at Dylan and Helly's instigation, and barely Mark's, who kind of accedes to it, a funeral for Irving B. And that has the very creepy image of a gigantic watermelon with Irving's face carved into it. And it almost felt like a cannibalistic ritual where people, like in the South Pacific hundreds of years ago, would consume the dead, their dead relatives, in order to sort of intake them into their body as energy and have them kind of live forever in that way. But maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into that, and it just was Lumen being creepy. Interestingly enough, when I was looking up the black watermelon from Malaysia, I found out that watermelons in general, and this type in particular, is used for some sort of weird Chinese ceremony called biting into autumn, where they actually prepare for the different seasonal changes by eating a watermelon. And seasons, as I mentioned, are linked to the humors, with autumn being woe, which is cold and dry. So maybe it has something to do with those, the weird humoral medicine that Lumen practices, which did remind me a lot of the weird, old-fashioned, and clearly false medical practices that Scientologists use, like, to curing a cold or any sickness by taking huge amounts of vitamin C. The eulogy that Dylan gives for Irving B is beautiful, and it does feel like what a young teenager would say about a lost friend.
It's hard to pinpoint a favorite Irving story. For the least fun guy in the world, he was really fun. He put the dick in contradiction.
There's also a very odd reaction from Milchick. Usually in the background, he's just sort of sitting, staring, smiling, and watching them benevolently like they're children somehow. But here he's actually, he winces a little bit when Dylan starts swearing when talking about Irving. Maybe he's just disgusted, maybe he's upset, maybe does he feel bad? Does he feel angry at Dylan for doing that? Or does he feel that, does he recognize briefly that this is a wildly inappropriate thing that he's doing here by essentially killing an innie in the last episode? And he wants at least some level of reverence and decorum around the funeral, which of course it's not Dylan's fault. He doesn't know or understand because he's never experienced an actual funeral before. But I thought that was an interesting moment. We do get a lot in this episode about the upper echelons of Lumen, because we get to see a performance review that Mr. Milchick has with Natalie and Mr. Drummond. And I thought Natalie's face was really interesting during the review, because she has a blank, almost cold expression when looking at Milchick. She's not her all smiles and friendliness facade during this. And Milchick once again brings up those racist paintings that were given to him that he clearly feels upset about. And, he rightfully is upset about them. And they mention it in the performance review, which I thought was strange, and it changed my opinion on the paintings.
You received the gift of Kier paintings with grace.
Which I thought was an odd thing to mention, and I began to thinking, what if it wasn't just a bunch of stupid old white people that didn't understand what they were doing as racist? What if it was a test? What if they knew that this was a racist provocation against him and they wanted to test his loyalty to the company by checking to see, are you loyal 100% to Lumen, or do you put other things first? Also, the actor playing Mr. Drummond is great. He's an Icelandic-American actor named Olafur Olafsson, and his voice is heavenly. Like, this is one of the best voices I've ever heard.
You arranged an outdoor retreat and team-building occurrence, which resulted in the termination of one employee and the discovery of the true identity of another, at great risk and harm to the Egan name.
I hope Audible is trying to contact him, because I would 100% listen to an audiobook in that voice. It's just so velvety and rich and deep. Oh my God, it's great. Because we've seen this before with Miss Cobell, that everyone is basically treated identically at the company. The fact that everyone is treated horribly and dehumanized and, you know, considered with a kind of bureaucratic contempt is because from the very top of the company, every single subordinate is treated that way, and then in the cycle of victimhood, which remains unbroken, they end up treating the people below them with disdain and contempt, and it's just, it's wonderful to see that everyone is their own form of victim. They take their own victimhood and become victimizers themselves later on with whoever is below them, instead of looking upward and saying, you're the problem for treating us this way and we all need to unite against you. So that was a fascinating little tidbit into the world of Lumen. And we actually even get to see Helena at the beginning of the episode talking to Mr. Drummond. And even the daughter of the CEO, is kind of treated in this disdainful way.
And the work is mysterious and important, so we must give him her.
Which seemed like a contemptuous way of a contemptuous non-answer given to workers that are considered non-human at Lumen. But apparently it's also used amongst the executives to describe what's going on to others. Maybe even Helena herself doesn't know what's going on. I mean, and what is happening is apparently going to have earth-shaking consequences, which is wonderfully, I hope this is actually reaching the story of Lumen outside of the building and the MDR workers into the wider world. Because Mr. Drummond claims,
Mark Scout's completion of Cold Harbor will be remembered as one of the greatest moments in the history of this planet.
So what in the world does that mean? I thought it was just going to have localized effects on maybe Miss Casey and possibly Mark. But could the solving of this problem be some sort of, bring some scientific breakthrough that's going to allow Lumen to continually exert its power and authority over the rest of the world, and maybe give everyone that Severance chip? We got another nail driven into the coffin of my good Helena theory when she refers to the innies as...
They're fucking animals.
And listen, Helena, girl, I don't think you should be using the phrase fucking animals, okay? If you consider them animals, you did a little bit of with some animals yourself in the last episode. So I don't know what, maybe it's all an act. Maybe it's an act. And she actually does consider them human, because there's this weird shot late in the episode where we see Helena, as she's leaving the office, look at Mark. At least I think it's her. I thought, it has her same hair, so I'm assuming it's Helly, or Helena, excuse me. And why would she be trying to meet up with him outside of work? Is she becoming obsessed with him? Of course, he would know who Helena Egan, a famous figure, is. So but maybe he's going to try to pursue a relationship with her outside in order to get closer to Lumen and figure out some secrets. So that could be interesting stuff to see what Helena, maybe she's going to reveal herself as not being horrendous. I know I keep harping on that, and it seems very naive considering what we've learned about Helena, but I don't know, maybe. Also, the whole pregnancy theory, I mean, it's been like 48 hours. Obviously, you wouldn't know for quite some time. At least weeks are going to have to pass, if not like a month or two, before she gets suspicious, I think. Unless there's some sort of fancy Lumen technology that lets you know instantaneously or something. I don't know. It's difficult to know Milchick's feelings for the performance review because he seems like he's run ragged by this review and this arduous process of answering for all of his screw-ups while he was running the department. And maybe he's having some second thoughts about it, but in other ways he's acting like the polar opposite and agrees to crack the whip a little harder when it comes to all these severed employees. And there's this very weird, threatening interaction that Milchick has with Mark.
Did you and Helly catch up?
We did.
Did you tell her that you fucked her outie at the ORTBO?
But he guessed it somehow, or I assume Helena didn't tell anyone. I mean, I guess that almost certainly did not happen. I enjoyed this little duel between Milchick and Mark, because Mark has been very meek during his interactions back. He is no longer interested in running around the halls like crazy. He doesn't want to agree with his two severed co-workers. And yet at the end, at this point, he's suddenly confrontational again and is angry and insulting at Milchick, and they have this little standoff between each other. Mark doesn't actually admit to the sex with Helena, but, you know, it's clear that Mr. Milkshake, he knows what happened. Maybe Mark is terrified that if it's found out that he slept with the CEO's daughter, that he'll be killed or tortured or some horrible thing will happen to him, which is a terrifying prospect. And maybe that could explain why he's suddenly subdued and wants to focus on the work, because he wants to avoid punishment for that, which may be extreme. I mean, I don't know if it's like Griffith sleeping with the king's daughter level of extreme, but I don't know exactly what would happen, and maybe he's just terrified, but maybe I'm just being a little bit too nice to Mark being a raging asshole for no reason the entire episode. We also get a little bit more about Miss Wong in this episode, and she goes into... She actually expresses herself a little bit more.
You shouldn't let them have a funeral. It makes them feel like people.
She's willing to ask questions to Mr. Milchick and actually express contrary opinions, which Milchick may consider a little bit frightening because he was the subordinate expressing contrary opinions to Miss Cobell just a little while ago. I initially laughed off the idea that Miss Wong was a robot, but I don't know. It's hard to explain why a child is on the severed floor, unless maybe she's one of the weird creatures from the testing floor that maybe is coming up now. They're trying to create cloned workers. I don't know, but maybe she is a machine. And she also, but she also, it's hard to believe she's entirely a machine because she does seem to have some feelings, you know, gradually being expressed, like saying the bonfire was cool last episode, saying she wanted to play more theremin here, being a little bit upset, being happy or smiling when Helly was there. And she almost threatens Milchick when she mentions his performance review that day. So I'm baffled as to what's going on with this young lady, unless she is a robot. I mean, I don't know. We also get to have another very sweet moment with everyone's favorite geriatric homoerotic entanglement between Bert, Christopher Walken, and Irv, John Turturro. And they actually meet outside of Lumen. Apparently Bert's been following Irving around, and we learned that Bert did not retire. He was fired because of the erotic entanglement, they call it, with Irving.
You think we were an item?
Well, Field certainly thinks so. We had to cancel our trip to Milwaukee, thanks for that.
And he actually invites Bert over for dinner, which is strange. And Christopher Walken is great in this. We've sorely missed him these past few episodes. So I do enjoy that he's, you know, maybe they can get together, you know, on the outside. It's kind of weird that, you know, I feel bad for Bert's husband, you know, because how is he supposed to feel about all this? He thought his husband was just at a job, and now he's like leaving him for someone else. I mean, you know, that's a complicated issue, but it was still kind of sweet seeing them together. We also know now that Ragabi is weirdly living with Mark and sort of helping him prepare the more reintegration, which apparently takes more than one attempt to reintegrate, which I don't think did Ragabi say that before? I don't think she did. But the very end of the episode closes out with Mark's Audi reintegrating a little bit more and finding memories of Miss Casey. And
your Audi is going to be...
Once again, the acting phenomenal on just the face. You can see the fear and sadness and hope and terror all at the same time on his face. It's great stuff. It's really, really good. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention that there's some sort of weird stuff going on with time in this episode. I didn't notice it myself, but I was reading what other people were talking about on the Severance Reddit, and for some reason, I hadn't really thought about this before, but there's claims that some sort of weird time dilation is going on at Lumen, which barely makes sense. But, you know, we see Milchick at 1 p.m. before his performance review, and then we find out the performance review, which he goes to later, may last as long as 4 to 6 hours. And we also see Milchick back with Mark 4 hours later. So it would have been before, presumably, it was before 4 hours. So it would have been before the performance review ended, which is very odd. I don't know. Maybe it was just some sort of weird accidents, that they didn't, the showrunners didn't know that was going to happen. But everything is done so precisely and intentionally in Severance that maybe there was some sort of reference to time not working the same way on the severed floor. I also found out, they also mention time later on in the episode when we talk about Rickon, who is rewriting his book to be more innie friendly. But in fact, it's just, mimicking Lumen's words of control. And we actually get to see Rickon in a bad light instead of as a villain, not villain, but as not a good person instead of just being a comic relief side character. He's actually shown as a greedy jerk who wants to give this essentially like manual to be a better slave for Lumen.
Unless me selling millions of copies of my book and the life that manages to give us has somehow lost its appeal for you.
Really nasty and crude, ugly thing for him to say. Probably the eeriest part of the episode happens at the very beginning when the previously mentioned guy from the testing floor meets with a group with two people from optics and design, and they're clearly afraid of him for reasons unknown, and they sort of hold their hands reverently in front of them as he walks over there. And he picks up dental supplies, which maybe it's nothing. Maybe they're just people living down there and they need dental work, a cavity. I don't know what could be happening down there. But the first thing I thought of when I saw those dental tools was the Marathon Man, and maybe they're, doing some sort of excruciating dental torture on people down there, which I hope is not happening, but it's very, very creepy. The guy also whistles the tune to the song of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Which was a shipwreck that happened, I think, in Lake Superior, one of the Great Lakes back in the 70s. And there are lyrics in that which mention that the sea does not give up its dead. And we know that Keir is obsessed with water, specifically the Great Lakes. And maybe the dead that are not given up, or the people that have not actually died but have been taken after their deaths were faked down to the testing floor. And we're going to be, like Mark said with Persephone in an earlier episode, we're going to have to go back down there and rescue them from hell or the abyss of water. Water is also linked to winter because it's cold and wet, and phlegm, and that, and I think dread as one of the four tempers. But yeah, that's about it. I was excited to see where all of this craziness will eventually lead. I want more about Helly R in the next episode, because we got none of her for the past 4 episodes. You know, she's been gone like almost half the season, and I want her back to see what's going. You know, is she going to try to pursue Miss Casey on her own? Because we don't really get her specific opinions about Miss Casey, but just based on her moral, righteous attitude, I would imagine that she would try to go and find Miss Casey herself. And we don't know if Dylan... Oh, I forgot to mention, Dylan actually found, based on the hang in there statement that Irving gave in the last episode, a secret map giving directions to the testing floor. But because Dylan doesn't want to lose his privileges, I don't know if he's going to tell anyone about that. I feel like he would, but maybe only with some prying from Helly and Mark. And I really hope Mark becomes less of an asshole in the next episode and actually realizes he needs to look for Miss Casey again. And, it must be, like, what if Helly R finds out that the person she had affections for in season 1, Mark, slept with her outie? And maybe she just never... could she return to some sort of relationship with Mark after that? I don't know if it's even possible, but, I hope. Hope love conquers all in this Brazil-like corporate hell state. Now, if you've been watching this channel for years, you know I'm going to have to mention that there is what I think is an undeniable Twin Peaks reference right here, with Irving being portrayed behind the signature red curtains with the weird spotlight on his face here, and, there's nothing more to say except that's really awesome. Here is my wacky, ridiculous theory that I thought of that seems absurd, looking back on it now, but hey, it's there, so I thought I'd mention it. What if no one in the Lumen higher-ups is actually a human? What if they are all robots at this point? And they killed, ages ago, one of the earlier CEOs or something like that, and they're keeping James Egan sick and immobile in bed while they engage in this process of using the severed chips in order to enslave all of humanity. And in order to do that, they're going to have to balance their tempers and give them a more flat, empty, robotic kind of outlook on the world. And in order to do that, they need to be severed and then given some sort of... And once all of their humors or emotions are balanced, in other words, they really don't feel very much of anything, they can be used as slaves by these robotic creatures who are controlled by the board, which isn't James Egan and his friends, but it is actually, as people have speculated, a motherboard or a computer that's actually running everything. I feel like that might be the most idiotic thing I've ever said, but I did think it, and I thought it's fair to admit what I thought when watching the episode. So yeah, as usual, tell me your theories and thoughts about what's going on, what's happening at Lumen, if you think they're all robots, why is Mark being such an asshole? Do you think we can still salvage the relationship between Helly R and Mark? Do you think that there could be an outie relationship between Bert and Irving? What's going on? I want to find out. And of course, remember,
I love you.